If you're just constantly running, you're just reacting, and you're saying, I don't have time to sit back and journal. I don't have time to sit and plan. I don't have time to sit and strategize. There's things that need my immediate attention. Well, then that's never going to change because you're not putting a plan in place to solve the very challenge that you have right now. I'm Michael Mogill, founder and CEO of CRISP, the nation's #1 law firm growth company. I've built my business through practice, not theory. CRISP started with just $500 to my name and has grown to over 8 figures in revenue over the last few years, earning a spot on the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Our approach has been to take everything we've learned about generating massive growth within our own organization and help the country's most ambitious and committed law firm owners do the same for theirs. In each episode of this podcast, I sit down with innovative market leaders from the legal industry and beyond to learn from those who thrive in the face of adversity, challenge the status quo, and define what it means to be a true game changer.
This is Jessica, Head of Coaching Strategy at CRISP, and today we're flipping the script for another special edition episode to get Michael's take on why you're stuck solving the same problems and how to break the cycle for good, how to turn reflection into action that drives real lasting change, and why success always comes down to your habits and mindset.
The unfortunate truth is that growth requires discomfort. You're not going to achieve any level of growth until you experience some sort of challenge that you have to overcome, that develops your skills, that develops your capabilities, that provides you confidence by overcoming that. It's all about who you become.
That's coming up on the Game Changing Attorney podcast. All right, here we are, AMMA.
Before we started recording, we were talking about the key to a successful podcast, the #1 thing that you can do, and it is just consistency. Right? It's not the production value. It's not even the guests. It's just the consistency. Because this year, I believe it is in March, maybe March 30th, maybe the start of April, will be 5 years of the Game Changing Attorney podcast. And when we set out to do it, we made a commitment that we'd be consistent. I don't know if I committed to doing it for 5 years. I said I'd do it for a year, and then we would evaluate. And no differently than even the AMMAs, which were a new segment that we introduced, and now we do those consistently as well. So I would just say, whatever cadence you decide to do it on, we have episodes that come out twice a week now. When the podcast started, it was just once a week. Heck, if you could do once every other week or even once a month, as long as you're consistent with it. But I see, and it doesn't just apply to podcasts, it applies to any sort of content marketing in general. It applies to really any sort of habits in general. As long as you are consistent, I would bet on the consistent human versus the one that is inconsistent. So, and that is just a standard that you set. So people who subscribe to this podcast, they pull up their phone or wherever they listen on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they got a podcast there for them.
Yes.
So it's consistently there for them.
Yes.
And I would just say that there's just power to consistency.
100%. And all things in life.
Yeah. Well, and it's I think once you've done it for a long enough period of time, it just becomes, the rhythm.
Yeah.
Right? It's you wake up, you consistently brush your teeth. You've done certain things consistently throughout your life. You consistently, take a shower every day. We're all committed to our, whatever our set of habits are.
Yes.
And sometimes those habits, change and evolve. Whenever I see someone that's they get so excited about some sort of idea or new initiative they want to do, let's say in their law firm or their business, I always ask them, how are you going to commit to doing that? And if they're like, I'm just going to give it a shot for a little bit, if say it's doing vlogs or writing blog posts or recording little video bits or even a podcast like this, right? And if they're not committed to doing it for at least a year, I'll say, I don't know how serious you are about it.
Yeah, because the excitement will fade.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Excitement fades. It becomes, it feels like work a lot of times. I mean, some days you feel like it, some days you don't. But those that can put all of that aside and say, hey, I'm consistent to this. I'm committed to it. So I'm going to do this on a consistent cadence.
Yeah.
Right? We see the most successful firm owners. Some people ask, how did they become so successful? Well, they consistently practice the right habits day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, right? Their success didn't come in the first week that they started doing some sort of habit. Somebody would ask them and say, well, I've been doing this for the last 10 to 15 years straight. That's how we got good.
Yeah.
We've been doing the things that, are sometimes the boring stuff. Sometimes it's not very exciting, but we've been doing the right thing consistently over time. And then it starts to compound and, compounds over time. And then the results become exponential. So the key is consistency.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
All right. Speaking of consistency,
Here we go.
Here we are on the AMMA. Before we get to the questions, Jessica, we got to let people know.
Yes.
When you submit the questions, and anyone can submit the questions. Like if you're listening to this podcast, you can submit questions. You can submit them at 404-531-7691. You just text us, and you might see your question on the podcast. And we love getting questions. Jessica, I know you group them up by different topics to keep them, just relevant. But we get thousands of questions submitted. If there's something you want answered, it's not like there's like a queue of questions.
Yeah.
You just see things that are like interesting and relevant, and we see it and say, okay, great. This could be a great question to answer on the podcast. So you can submit them anytime. And then we do not run any ads on this podcast. So as you're listening, it's not going to have some sort of interruption to sell you something, right? There's no sponsors or anything like that. But we do ask that if you enjoy this podcast, if you get any sort of value from it, that you go on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify and leave us a 5-star review. It helps us reach more people, and it also helps us keep the podcast free. So for 5 years, almost 5 years, right? It's about to be 5 years.
Yeah.
Since day one, this podcast has been completely free. No ads, no sponsors, nothing. Like uncensored, unfiltered. What we say, what our guests say, you just listen to it and it's unchapped. Okay. So what do we got this week, Jessica? What are the questions?
So now we jump in with question number 1. Michael, I find myself constantly solving the same problems in my business, whether it's with clients, team members, or operations. How do I break this cycle?
It sounds like you're not really solving the problems.
Yeah.
So
you're band-aiding them.
It's interesting to say, like, consistently solving.
Yeah.
And then it's consistently solving the same problems. Isn't that like a funny way of saying things? So, because the idea of like solving or solution is the fact that you would not have to solve it again, right? Because if it were solved. So there's some sort of like half measure at play. And like you said, probably a Band-Aid. So sometimes it's a function of addressing symptoms versus root issues and really getting down to the root. I know it's tempting as a business owner sometimes to just want to like address in a very reactive state of just like, let me just handle this, right? If there's a client issue, it's like, well, let me just reach out and let me apologize. Or let me like figure out, if it's, let's say you fail to hit certain growth targets, it's saying, okay, we'll try again next year, or we'll try again next quarter or next month, or, or whatever it is. Instead of really drilling down and saying, well, why are we not succeeding? Or why are we solving these same problems over and over and over again? Because you're not solving those problems. I know you're pretty passionate about this topic. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a difference in fixing something and actually solving something. I'm a huge fan of solving and not fixing. I view fixing as the Band-Aid side of that. I know people say it all the time, and it's like, what if I got hit by a bus? But that's truly how I approach things, is if I were not here, how would this get done? And I think a great case was actually like our second daughter. She came 2 weeks early. That was it. I was off the grid at that moment. I mean, not fully off the grid, but you know what I mean in that case. But you just have to have things documented first and foremost. But then, of course, there are things that are just critical thinking. And it's just how do you think? How do you go about solving things? And so it's teaching people also how to think. So we also a lot of times use a 1-3-1 method. So if you have one problem, come to me with 3 proposed solutions, and we together will determine what that one solution is. But then at some point, you just cut it and you say, go do it, go figure it out. And if you fail, you fail. But I think as the owner, you also have to accept that that person is going to fail as they solve something, and they may not solve it the way that you wanted to the first time, and you've got to let them learn that. But personally, coming from someone with such an ops brain, I mean, I'm an engineer at heart, things should be repeatable. Things should not be where like I'm figuring out the same thing over and over again. And then I look at it also even from a visionary or more of the ideation side of someone, like that's also frustrating and that's boring. So you yourself have to help break that pattern, because it's your fault at the end of the day. I actually was talking to you about this recently, and it's actually taking the time to reflect and say, hey, like, where has all of this gone wrong? Where has this broken down? And why? And it's your fault at the end. In this case, it's my fault. It's your fault. But you, the owner, it's your fault that there is this dependency on you.
Yeah, I'm over here catching L's. And it's all my fault.
Not your fault.
I know. I'm just joking.
Whoever is listening right now, it's your fault.
Yeah. I look at it in the standpoint of like when something goes wrong, right? Say in the business, for me, it immediately is, okay, I'm not as upset about that. I'm more so interested in
the lesson.
How do we ensure that this is solved in a way where it never happens again? Because then it becomes a learning lesson.
Yes.
So I remember years ago, we had a situation where like somebody made a mistake, and I forget what it was. It was like $1,000 mistake. And they were just like mortified, and they thought they'd messed up. They thought they were going to get fired. right? And they came to me and they're like, am I fired? And I said, well, here's the thing. If I fire you and then hire somebody else, then you've already made this mistake and you've learned from it, but they haven't made that mistake yet. So let's just consider it $1,000 lesson, right? And I mean, obviously there's limits to that. You don't want people making $1 million mistakes, but in some organizations, let's say like multi-billion-dollar organizations that, they're just learning lessons.
Right.
And so for me, I'm more interested in mistakes not being repeated.
Yes.
As opposed to mistakes are going to happen. And it's an opportunity to improve the process, improve training. There's always something that either you didn't anticipate you can learn from, and that's fine as long as you are learning from it.
Yeah, I think a key point on that too is actually taking the time to stop and reflect on the situation as well, because there will be a million things. You will go on to the next thing, but actually taking the time to say, hey, what did I expect to happen and what actually happened and why did that happen? Because if you don't actually take the time to pause, you'll never actually solve it.
Well, we do like debriefs here.
Yeah.
Right. So whether after any sort of like campaign launch, after an event, after any sort of initiative, anything like that, we always do a debrief or a postmortem where we kind of go through what went well, what could be improved upon, what were lessons learned, how, what are areas for improvement, that sort of thing. So, and that's been extremely important because I know in a lot of organizations, they just move on from one thing to the next instead of reflecting on what were the lessons that were learned. Sometimes nearly everything went well, but there was always something that, okay, well, we could have done this a bit better. We could have improved here. We've now done 7 conferences, like 7 Game Changer Summits. And after every single one, I think the reason why like the 7th one is one of the highest rated ones was because every time we've done a debrief, and now we've done this debrief, now 7 times. So each time we're looking at, okay, where can we improve? Now we have a whole lot of data. Now we're looking at in terms of like, how can we improve the experience? How do we ensure that, everything from a production standpoint is great? The speakers are great. Like, it's just everything to deliver a even better and better experience, even when you're getting like a 9.8 or something average feedback, right? Like, even if you have that at, 9.8 out of 10 is phenomenal, but we look at it and say, okay, there's always things you could do better.
Yes. And
I think that type of mentality, is great. So when you look at avoiding like mistakes, I think it's less of, avoiding any mistake period, because there's going to be things you can't anticipate, especially if you have a growing organization. You have a lot of people and a lot of complexity, and more so around a culture of, if there is some sort of mistake that's made, being more interested in how do we prevent that from happening again in the future.
Yes, exactly. Question number 2. Michael, I've heard so many leaders talk about how important it is to reflect on the past, but when you're in the thick of it, juggling business, clients, and life, it feels like a waste of time. How do I make room for reflection when it seems like I should just keep pushing forward?
It's interesting. If over the years we've done, so many coaching workshops. I mean, I don't know how many it's been. We did almost 50 last year. So at this point, I don't know, we've probably done over 300.
For sure.
At least. When somebody new joins the program, sometimes we'll do like a reflection tool. And they're like, man, I don't want to do this reflection tool. I just want to learn how to grow my business. It's interesting because those that have been in the coaching program for a while, they'll look at that. Now they do, they'll respond. Yeah. They'll handle that objection. Years ago, we would handle that objection of saying that, look, failure to reflect is a failure to grow. And if you don't take time to kind of zoom out and kind of take a bird's eye view on the business, then you're just going to be, kind of like, what is it? Like a gerbil running or a hamster running on a wheel. Hamster running on a wheel. By the way, these hamsters, these are savages, these animals, right?
Okay, this is disgusting.
My buddy Eric had a hamster when he was a child, and basically he had 2 hamsters. And one day he went into that, just to pet his hamster, and he found that one of the hamsters had bitten the head off another hamster.
It's gross.
These are savage animals.
Yes.
Okay? That's
what
hamsters do.
Have rodents.
Yeah.
Never.
So anyway, back to the question. If you're just constantly running and you're just reacting, and you're saying, I don't have time to sit back and journal. I don't have time to sit and plan. I don't have time to sit and strategize. Like, there's things that need my immediate attention. Well, then that's never going to change, because you're not putting a plan in place to solve the very challenge that you have right now, right? So if you're very reactive, whenever I meet like a stressed out entrepreneur, and you're talking to like a stressed out firm owner, and it seems like they're going a mile a minute and their phone's ringing and someone's running them something and the emails are popping off and they're like, I don't have time, right? And it's like, okay, you don't have time because you don't invest time in actually zooming out in the business and figuring out, how do I focus on working on the business versus working in it? Because that's never going to change. You're already at capacity. So you have to find a way to free yourself up. And then chances are, like, you got into the situation by making certain types of decisions. And the only way you're going to get out of that situation is by making different decisions. So you have to be able to zoom out anytime you're doing any sort of reflection. Whenever we do quarterly planning, whenever we do leadership meetings, we spend a lot of time on reflection. And it's not this like cute concept of like, frou, let's sit here and examine our feelings. That's not what it's about. It's more so around, let's examine like our
data,
the data, our thought process about things. Like, how do we make better decisions? How do we improve? Those become much more leverageable, especially as your organization starts to grow. I wish, looking back, especially when we started the business, if I spent more time on reflection, I would have made a lot less mistakes, and I would have done a lot less dumb things. Okay, and a lot of the stupidity, I think, is attributed to not taking a step back and properly evaluating something. So whenever I made those mistakes, it was based on like being reactive or impulsive and those types of things. So now when we actually sit back and reflect, and it's not just reflecting about the business, reflecting personally.
Always.
You can, you get into like lifestyle design, that sort of stuff. But just in general, there's nothing cute about it. It's the best leaders on this planet. That's exactly what they do. So if you're like a professional sports franchise and you just came off a losing season, the absolute worst thing you could do is just going back into the next practice and to practice the same way you were practicing and do the same things you were doing. And guess what next season's going to look like? It's going to be the same result. But instead, if you can re-examine and say, all right, let's look at everything that we're doing because we just had a losing season. And if we do the same things, the same action steps are going to have the same results. So something has to change. And maybe in terms of how we practice that changes, maybe the personnel has to change, maybe the front office has to change. The other side of this, where like, and I say this because we see this with the Atlanta Falcons, right? And we see this with a lot of other, professional sports teams. Sometimes someone's like impulsive and saying, you know what, we need to make a change. And they don't know what change because they haven't really properly evaluated things. They just know a change needs to happen. And that's what leads to, sometimes having like 5 head coaches in like 6 years or something, right? Like that's how that happens because you think, okay, I just need to make a change. Sometimes that's not the change you need to make. And it's important to properly evaluate and properly reflect. And if you're just going from one thing to the next, you're never going to do that.
Yeah, so true. All right. And to round us out today with question number 3, I see so many people who seem to have everything fall into place for them. Meanwhile, I feel like I'm constantly grinding and not getting anywhere. What am I missing, and why does it feel like success comes easier for everyone else but me? Poor person.
Oh, poor baby. Turns out it is easier for them, and you're just unlucky, right? You just were dealt a bad hand, and everybody else, success is easy.
Yeah.
Right?
No work.
No, it's like, I don't know why you're even struggling so much. The honest answer here is, number one, you don't know that it's actually easy for anyone. Okay, and your perception of what you see may not always be aligned with what reality looks like. You don't know what somebody is doing when you are slacking off. You don't know what they're, what kind of trade-offs they're making. Maybe they're not watching Netflix. Maybe while you're watching Netflix, they're, working on their business.
Yeah. Maybe
they're coming in on Saturday and Sunday. Maybe you don't see that on social media. And maybe they've been doing that for 10 or 20 years. And now what it looks like, it's like everything they do is just successful, and it's like, that's not true. I heard this about our business just over the years because they'll see like these big events and they see these big conferences and, obviously the Game Changer Summit, and they're like, everything they do, it just seems to just work so well and every room is full, and, it's like, okay, well, I step into our organization and you will see that we earn every single inch, right? Nothing is easy. Everything is battle. It's a problem to solve. It's things to overcome. Most of the time when we do something, first attempt it doesn't work, second attempt it doesn't work. We have to do a lot of testing. We do a lot of iteration, and there's sometimes it can be very frustrating.
Yeah.
Right. But we figure it out.
Yeah.
And what you end up seeing is a good outcome, but what you don't see is what is it like the 1,000 attempts that didn't work out, right?
Yeah.
And the 1,000 things that didn't work. So. I also think sometimes when people ask these questions, it's a very much like a victim mindset.
It is.
Right? Like, I don't know what they want from the standpoint of, are you just looking for validation or are you actually looking for the answer? Because if you want to hear, because I think people gravitate towards comfort. Like what people want is comfort. When they say they want change, they want comfort. When someone says, coming into a new year, I want to make a change. Okay. They want comfort. Okay. When they want to change jobs, they want comfort. That's what they really are. That's what they really want. Like whether they say it or not. The unfortunate truth is that growth requires discomfort. You're not going to achieve any level of growth until you experience some sort of challenge that you have to overcome, that develops your skills, that develops your capabilities, that provides you with confidence by overcoming that. It's all about who you become. So it's less about what you want to achieve and more about the person that you have to become in the process in order to have those outcomes.
Yeah.
So maybe today you're not worthy, right?
Yeah.
And maybe future you is.
Yeah.
But the difference between you today and future you is the experiences, the challenges overcome, the skills developed.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
The work.
The work.
Yeah.
Quite literally the work. So what's the difference between someone succeeding and somebody who's not succeeding? Sometimes they just have better information too. Maybe you're trying to do everything on your own and you're having to make every single mistake on your own. And I don't know if you're learning from those mistakes or not. I don't know if you even necessarily believe that you're doing anything wrong.
Right.
As far as you're concerned, you may say, I work hard, I'm smart. And that's table stakes. In terms of like entrepreneurs, most people have a general level of intelligence. Most are smart, right? Most are hard workers. So, okay, that's not a clear differentiator. You say, I'm a really hard worker. Well, so is everybody else, right? This isn't like, middle school, okay? Like everybody is a hard worker. We all work hard, okay? And everybody is smart. So that's not enough. There's some people that put themselves in environments and communities. This is one of the reasons we started the coaching program, where you can learn from other people that have achieved the things that you're setting out to achieve, so you don't have to make every mistake on your own. I think that's big. Some people have great coaches, they have great mentors, so they're not figuring everything out on their own and having to make every single mistake. Because, as we say, like, you're going to run out of money before you run out of mistakes.
Yes.
Every time.
You're
definitely going to lose more money doing it that way because there's an infinite number of mistakes you can make. So, again, it's putting yourself in the right environment. Maybe the ones that are succeeding are doing so. Maybe they have better information than you. Maybe they have a better, decision-making framework than you that they've learned and developed, as part of like a skill they make. Maybe, quite frankly, they just have more skills than you. There could be, yes, we talked about work ethic and so on, but maybe they have a different vision than you. And then there's people define success in different ways. So there's some people that, you can look at success in terms of like financial success, and then there's success in terms of like, do your kids want to be around you? And then there's success in terms of, are you fulfilled? Are you engaged? Are you spending your time the way you want to spend it? You can define success in a number of different ways. I think it's more important to care less about what somebody else is doing and what their success might look like, and instead focus more on what you need to do to achieve the things that you want to achieve. So comparison is very much the thief of joy. In the NFL, every owner of every franchise, I believe, is a billionaire. And even when they have like owners meetings, there is billionaires that feel inferior to other billionaires because there's ones that have more billions than they do. So just put that in perspective, that like Jeff Bezos today probably feels inferior as a billionaire because he's number 2 to Elon Musk, because Elon Musk has about 100 more billion than he does, right? Or his net worth is, at least. I would imagine in some respects, I don't know that Jeff Bezos really cares.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know if he cares or not. I know Elon Musk doesn't care. And I think some of the happiest people don't care about, what somebody else is doing, and are more concerned about their life and their world and the people around them and their business and their clients and their community. And that's where I would put the focus. So if you feel like everybody else is winning and you're not, I would start by saying, by looking at it from the standpoint of, you're making bad decisions, or the decisions that you're making at the very least aren't getting you the results that you're after. Because if they were, you wouldn't be asking this question.
Yeah.
So step one, it's like, how do you improve your decision-making framework? Okay. And you can justify and look at it from the standpoint of, well, you don't really know how well somebody else is doing. It's not like every time they make a social media post, you have insight into what their bank account is, right? And like how much money is in there. You have no idea. I've seen, over the years with entrepreneurs, ones that look amazing on social media and everything's great. And then internally in their personal life and even in their business, they're really, really, really struggling. Like they've got a highlight reel on social media and they're like just 3 feet from broke.
Yeah.
On a personal level, if you actually knew them. And so they'll smile when they take the selfie, right? But you're not seeing everything else in between.
Yeah.
So the lesson here is to focus on you. And maybe instead of seeking out validation, is surrounding yourself with other individuals who've achieved the things you want to achieve and learning from them.
Exactly. And that rounds us out today.
Okay, until next time.
You've been listening to the Game Changing Attorney podcast with Michael Mogill. If you found this episode valuable, here are 3 free ways that we can help you grow your law firm. Number 1, download the first chapter of Michael's book absolutely free at gamechangingattorney.com. Number 2, you can shoot Michael a text at 404-531-7691 and ask him any question you'd like. You might just hear the answer on the next episode. And finally, number 3, if you can leave this podcast a 5-star review, it will help us gain access to more influential thought leaders and bring their lessons learned here to you. For more information on this episode, see the show notes in your podcast app or visit legalpodcast.com.